When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be continuing our Song of Ice and Fire reread, and specifically a Game of Thrones. We're going to be doing Ned VII. Again, another Ned chapter. We get a ton of them in this first book. And, well, this is his only book, so yeah. But this chapter is going to be picking up right after Sansa. Where we left off with Sansa is Sansa has watched the first day of the tourney and the jousting, and she's gone to basically her chambers back with the Hound escorting her, and all of the events at the feast. Ned VII kind of picks up right after that. We see that this is the morning of that day, and Ned is kind of, we're going to see his perspective of things that happened the day before, and also the continuation of the events follow. Before we get into the video as well, if you guys would like to subscribe, like, and comment, please do. Let's get into our first page, page 305. Now, the chapter begins with Ned talking to Barristan over Hugh's body. Now, remember, Hugh is this character that Ned was going to investigate because Hugh was a squire of Jon Arryn's. He would have had a lot of valuable information more than likely. So it's something that Ned's going to think about here on this page, is that this is a bit odd. Why is it that this guy dies at this point, right when Ned seems like he would be investigating him? It seems a little too suspicious. Now, Barristan notes that he had stood over his body all night, and Ned specifically asks if Hugh had anyone else in his family, and Barristan notes that he had a mother in a veil, and that's kind of all that they know of. And again, Ned is suspicious of this, because not only does Hugh die, but he also dies to a Lannister bannerman. Remember that it was the mountain that kills Hugh. So all of this is very suspicious. Hugh is someone that, in the point of view, I guess, of the Lannisters, in Ned's mind, would be someone that they would want to take out. Any loose ends of anybody that would know anything about Jon Arryn's death, they would want to take out. So Ned would kind of be viewing this as kind of a hit. Now, Barristan notes that he had been Jon's squire for 4 years, and talking about Hugh, not Barristan, but Robert had knighted him after Jon's death and before Robert went north. Now, curiously, that we learn that he desperately wanted it. Barristan even knew that he wanted a knighting. So there's a couple of things here that you could look into if you're someone that is, I guess, a little bit more pessimistic, is the idea that Hugh had a lot to gain by Jon's death at this point, because he would have gotten knighted immediately after out of respect for Jon. There's a lot of interesting ideas we see here, and we see in something else that I think is very interesting, is the idea of knighthood. How important it is for a lot of these southern knights and the southern people, and how much status it can give you. And I think that's something that's really interesting to talk about, why I think a lot of knights become very corrupt and they don't follow their responsibilities like someone like Brienne would. Because these people are all looking at knighthood completely wrong. Knighthood should be something that you should be achieving because of your good deeds, not because of the status that it brings you. And Barristan says that Hugh was just not ready. And Ned, really in his, quiet wolf sentiment, goes, none of us are ready for death. Again, a really deep and dark little conversation here between Barristan and Ned. But that gets us into page 306. Now, moving on, Ned thinks about how his death, Hugh's death specifically, will be remembered. That he died fighting in Ned Stark's tourney. And again, something that Ned never wanted. And now Hugh's death will be tied to Ned Stark's name and this tournament. It's, again, just another mark of why Ned just does not like these tournaments. It's just not, there should not be this idea that we're playing at war, right? Ned brings this up. Why are we playing at war? This serves no purpose. There's just a lot of things that Ned just disagrees fundamentally with this tournament, as we've seen in the chapters leading up to the tournament as a whole. Barristan thinks that the armor is worth a decent penny, and it had just been made for him. Now, this is something that's interesting because Barristan's kind of putting on this idea that this armor could be sold, or maybe that his mother would just sell it instead of, keeping it for, her son that died. But Ned notes that the armor will go back to his mother, and that the fees that, he may have still had with the armor will be paid by him. Ned and Barristan then make their way into camps, and again, we get a lot of good food descriptions in these two chapters, but they smell the fresh sausages and these amazing food descriptions. We note that the squires are having an early day by doing errands for the masters. Ned notes the different sigils and houses. He notes the Malisters, the Red Wines, the Karens, and many others. Again, playing on this idea that the tournament has brought many different houses, and we keep getting shown the Malisters specifically, which I think is very interesting because George places a lot of emphasis on them in these earlier chapters, which I did think was a little interesting. Now, as they continue, Barristan tells Ned that Robert intends to fight in the melee. Now, Ned, he already knew this, right? This is one of the big reasons why he's even here, is that he heard about the squabble or the argument between Cersei and Ned in the previous night, that Jory had informed him of it. And Ned is not very pleased about this. Ned is very grim about this news. And I think there's a lot of reasons here. One, it kind of just like is stupid for the king to participate in this tournament because, like, the reasoning he's going to tell Robert, like, who's going to actually swing at you? Like, you know, from that point of view. But the other point of view would be, this is the perfect time for a Lannister to kill Robert, or someone to be paid to kill Robert. If Cersei knows that Robert is going to be taking part in this melee, she could theoretically pay someone. And now that could be an interesting idea. What a better time to kill Robert than at a melee, and Robert's not fit for it? What if a sword went too far and killed Robert? Again, I think for Ned, there's a lot of reasons to be very cautious about this and to keep Robert out of this fighting. Barristan then ends the page with a fantastic line. I really loved this line. It's one of my favorite lines that we've gotten so far in this book, but Barristan says, "They say night's beauties fade at dawn, and the children of wine are oft disowned in the morning light." Now, I like this for so many reasons, because one, Barristan is going to say that, again, ideas that were formulated at night with wine, you know, again, Robert was drunk, maybe by the morning he won't remember it, or that he won't kind of follow through with it. And we know from, you know, how Ned like thinks about Robert in the next page that this isn't really true. That's not really Robert. Robert is someone that will remember, and remembering, he would never back down. But I want to go back to this line for a second and think about how many different meanings this could have, right? Whether this could be something as simple as, okay, at night you make bad decisions, and when the morning comes, you tend to see the light of your decisions. Whether this could be, say, for instance, let's say, you know, having a one-night stand, for instance, in this world, or something like that. Maybe at night when you're lusty or you thought this was a good idea, and in the morning you realize this wasn't really what I wanted. There's a lot of things like that, and that I think that you can build off of this quote. Things that happen, you know, there's like the famous quote, nothing good happens after a certain time at night. That could be basically what Barristan could be implying as well. There's so many meanings to that quote, and it's some very deep writing that I love from George. But that'll get us into page 307. And just by the background, you guys can tell we're getting to one of the best scenes of the first book with the breastplate stretcher. But we're getting there. Ned says that they do say so, but not of Robert. Robert will remember, and remembering when he would never back down. Again, like we talked about in the last page. But as Ned and Barristan approach, they see Robert's tent. Again, we get this idea here that Robert is a character that inherently has gone more into the pleasantries. He's someone that, you know, as time has gone by, he is someone that's been king for a while now. His tent is the biggest. It's the most extravagant golden tent with Robert's huge warhammer outside and a shield of the crowned stag. Ned had hoped to see him still abed, but no such luck for Ned. And again, I think it makes sense. You're trying to catch Robert before he's been able to really think anything through, and just as he's getting up in more of a vulnerable state, and Ned is not so lucky with that idea. They walk in to see two squires trying to fit Robert with a breastplate, which they are having zero success, as it is too small. Again, Robert is a very girthy guy. Robert already is someone that's very big in stature, so it'd be really hard to actually find him like good armor already as it is. But then you put it that he's like gotten really fat, which is what Ned is going to talk on here in a second. It's not a great recipe for success. But we also see something that I think is interesting to show how Robert's alcoholism has gone. He's already drinking beer as well. Now, I know that this is something that when we look at, for instance, I'm American, something that we see back in my history would be Prohibition. So this was kind of the idea that the United States for a while outlawed and banned alcohol. And one of the weirdest things about it is when you look at the world now, where we have so many different types of drinks that you can drink, right? You want a soda, you want Gatorade, you want water, you want juice, you want milk, you want whatever. There's so many options. When you kind of think about like medieval times, and even when I'm talking about Prohibition, wasn't really a lot of different variations of drinks. There was like the main ones you had was like water, milk, and alcohol. So you kind of look at this point and there's not a lot of options, first of all, for the types of drinks you can have. And then you also put that into the fact that Robert is kind of an alcoholic, and it's just like a really bad recipe, and you really see why Robert has kind of become this person that he is now. But Robert continues yelling at the squires, and we learn that the two are assigned there by Cersei. As Robert continues to insult them, and Ned, as cool as ever, tells Robert, the boys are at no fault. You are too fat for your armor. Again, Ned is very blunt and straight to the point with Robert, and I just think it's very interesting the way Ned is kind of realizing, wow, Robert really is just surrounded by Lannisters everywhere. And this is not great news, because when you think about the idea that, again, Lancel is definitely spying, doing Cersei's bidding, there's just so many people around Robert that Robert is not going to be able to trust. Robert is surrounded by, again, fools and flatterers as well. Robert at first seems a bit angry, saying, too fat, is that what you think? And then laughing, he says, why are you always right, Ned? This lets the two squires untense for a second until Robert tells them, you heard the king's hand, go find Aaron Santagar and get the breastplate stretcher. The boys, then tripping over each other, exit the tent. Again, this is just Robert poking some fun, getting a laugh out of these Lannister squires. And we know that there's no breastplate stretcher, and these squires, who probably have little to no experience with any of that, have no idea what's going on. Also, Robert probably is not the best person to be squiring for at this point, and at his state anyway. So getting into page 308, we see that as soon as they leave, Robert drops the act, laughing, and Barristan joins in it, and even Ned, someone who's very deathly serious right now, forces a smile. But even then, thinking about who the boys were, they both had the Lannister look, the golden curls and the green eyes. Again, Ned is just worried about Robert constantly being surrounded by Lannisters, which he should be. And this is one of those things where I think, I did a reaction on Saturday, and, I think there is some of this I think it's more of a casual audience that really thinks that Ned was stupid. But there's just so many things that Ned is very smart on, that he picks up on. And this is just one of those things where it's like, yeah, it may seem obvious, but a lot of people wouldn't understand that, like, having all these Lannisters close to Robert, who are very ambitious, not great. And, something I'm going to do a video this week as well about the Mad King. And, the Mad King was a crazy guy, but part of the reason when you look at why the Mad King goes crazy is because the ambitiousness of the Lannisters. Think about how they're getting positions everywhere within Robert's court. They're taking over completely. Ned then asks Robert if the boys are Lannisters, to which Robert says yes, they are sons to one of Tywin's brothers. He is not sure which. He has a funny line where he says basically that, I'm not sure if it's the dead ones or the live one. So it's a really awesome line I liked. But again, Robert then notes that Cersei comes from a large family, and to which Ned thinks a very ambitious family. Ned then asks about the quarrel last night, to which Robert says the damn woman is still up at the castle, and that Lyanna would never have shamed me so. Again, another interesting line here. If Lyanna did love Rhaegar, she did the ultimate shame to Robert. She broke the betrothal set between the two and went after another man. And then even further, it's the man that Robert hated, the one that Robert ended up being his arch enemy and killing. So again, another great little line there to foreshadow the idea that Lyanna probably loved Rhaegar and fits perfectly into that narrative. And again, something I wanted to note even before we get to Ned kind of confirming this is this doesn't really sound like Lyanna at all. From everything we know that Ned has talked about with Lyanna, does Lyanna kind of seem like this woman that wouldn't think Robert's an idiot? Lyanna is kind of built up this character as she has some of that wolf in her, right? That she's someone that doesn't kind of settle for people's bullshit. And she's someone that saw right through Robert, right? I don't think she'd put up with this type of attitude where Robert wants to, he's too fat, he has him doing all this stuff, and he's gonna go fight in the melee as the king. I don't see Lyanna in any world not standing up and saying, you know, that's stupid, Robert. And Ned says this exact point, that, Robert, you saw her beauty, but you did not know her. And Lyanna would tell you not to fight, and that he is the king. Robert refutes it, saying, yes, I sit on the chair, but I am still a man. I want to ride, drink, have sex, and he wants to hit someone. Again, this perfectly kind of encapsulates who Robert is as a person. Robert doesn't want these responsibilities. He wants to be a sellsword. It's basically what he wants to be. Like, Robert would be someone that would love to be in, for instance, the Golden Company. He would love to be in that, right? Just hitting people. Now, again, that doesn't say that, you know, Robert doesn't enjoy some of the comforts that come with being king, but he just doesn't enjoy the ruling part. He doesn't like, kind of what we see with Viserys and House of the Dragon. He's not someone that enjoys having to put up with all these people that are either lying to him, or they're not really telling him the truth either. They're giving him a little bit of the truth, but not the full truth. So again, I just think there's so many reasons as to why Robert just doesn't make a good king, and those are some of those reasons, that he just is not built for it. But this prompts Barristan to pipe up. Barristan then notes, who is going to risk hitting you? Robert says that any man can win by, you know, basically defeating him. But Ned says, no, only you will be remaining. No one would dare displeasure you and basically defeat you. And this takes Robert aback. He really never considered this, and it hits on his pride. He notes the Cravens would let him win, and Ned confirms this. Again, this completely goes against Robert. It's a great little manipulation of Robert, even though we might not consider this manipulation. How do you back someone down that's very prideful, that's very, like, headstrong? Well, you tell them, well, there's no point because it's going to go against your pride, right? Like, you winning is going to be a very blank title. You're not going to even earn it. And this really does make Robert rethink this whole thing. At this point, he's angry. He orders Barristan to leave or else he will kill him. Very interesting line. But yeah, Robert then kind of commands Ned to drink and begins saying, damn you and Jon Arryn. Robert loves them both, but what they have done to him, that either of them should have been king, not him, which is an interesting line. And I would agree with Robert. I think if we look at just the merits of who could have run the kingdom better, I think Jon Arryn and Ned Stark were probably better for the role. Now, with that being said, I don't think Jon Arryn was actually a particularly good hand of the king. He made a lot of sketchy decisions, and there are some things we just don't know fully about Jon Arryn. Like, his trip to Dorne, to me, is something that I think is very suspect, very suspicious. But again, I think he's right, though. I think Jon Arryn or Ned both would have been better kings than Robert. Ned then says, you had the best claim. And now that's the interesting part. Because if during the rebellion, you know, if Ned had said, I'm going to be king, how would that have made him look, right? Ned has no real ties to the throne. Also, Ned is not the person that is getting all the praise. He's not the person that the common people or the people following them love. Robert was that. Robert was the person that had the claim that they could back up justifying, you know, taking out the king. And also, he had the love of his army, of the people. He was this hero to a lot of people. That wasn't never really Ned. Ned didn't really seek for that gratification or the attention. And I think that's something that's very interesting, is that Robert fit every category for who should become king outside of the actual merits on being a good king. Robert then tells Ned to shut up and listen. He says, look at me. What kingship has done, too fat for his armor. And Ned again tries to butt in, but Robert shuts him down. Robert continues saying, he never felt so alive as when he won the throne, or is dead now that he has won. Again, it's a very sad sentiment here, as Robert's kind of reflecting on his younger years, and he's realizing, like, what kingship has done to him. He's someone that can't even fit into armor anymore. He's an alcoholic, and I know even when he was younger, he was probably an alcoholic as well. But he's someone that has completely destroyed his life, that this kingship has broken him. Now, he can blame it on, you know, the stresses of ruling, but a part of that is also on him as well. He made the life choices to be in his position that he's in right now. So, again, I think Robert, in a way, looking at his life and regretting a lot of the things that happened. I genuinely think Robert would have rather have killed Rhaegar and then been killed by some arrows or something. I think Robert would have been completely content with that. But that's just not the way things ended up going. And we see that right now he feels dead. He feels like a broken person. But that gets us into page 310. Robert then thinks of Jon Arryn and how he is to thank him for Cersei being his wife. Robert never wanted to wed after Lyanna, but Jon had insisted on it. It was good for the realm. He needed heirs and Tywin's backing if Viserys launched back into Westeros. And again, these are all fair points. And again, in Jon Arryn's defense, how is he supposed to know what Cersei is like? And again, Cersei was not this person that she was when Robert married her. Like, Cersei was kind of, she really liked Robert. Robert was this really handsome guy. He was a tall guy. He was very muscular. He, had a very kingly kind of look to him. But again, in that sense, the way Robert treated Cersei pushed her away from him. They could have had a decent relationship if Robert had been a better partner to her. And that's something that I think is always something I look back on Cersei and I view with a lot of sympathy, because Cersei was treated pretty badly in this relationship, regardless of how Cersei was not a great person leading up to this anyway. And another part of this that I agree with is that having the Lannisters backing is very useful. I mean, especially when you just had a civil war. Who else was Robert going to marry? And Robert does need heirs, right? A succession crisis is the last thing that the kingdoms need now, right? If Robert, say, was to die without any heirs, well, shit, where does the throne go now? Does it go to Stannis? Are we going to have the Viserys coming over? If we think about the Blackfyre rebellions, every time the Blackfyres came back over, it was usually when there was a weaker king or a king had just died. So could there be Viserys coming over with some supporters, the Golden Company? There was a lot of instability at this point right after they'd won the war. Getting the Lannisters on your side and getting them into your side with marriage made a lot of sense, because at this point, pretty much everybody was married into each other except for the Dornish and the Tyrells. So you had a really good foundation there. So again, I think Jon Arryn makes a pretty solid arrangement. It just didn't work out the best. Robert then talks about how Cersei has guarded herself and does not really let Robert have sex with her. I put that in a way more polite way than Robert did it, but more or less, can you blame Cersei at this point? Robert has become this overweight oaf who doesn't like her, really. He's someone that's still fantasizing about Lyanna, who's been dead for years at this point. He hasn't really treated her the best. I can't really blame Cersei on any of those accounts. So I thought that was a little interesting to note. Robert then takes the beer from Ned again, because Ned isn't drinking and Robert is an alcoholic, continuing saying he is sorry about the wolf and for Ned's daughter, Sansa and/or Arya. I'm not sure which one he's actually talking about. I'm assuming he's talking about Sansa, but he does just say his daughter. But yeah, he would stake his life on it that Joffrey was lying, and he asks Ned, "You love your children, right?" And Ned says yes, with all his heart. And I think this is something that's interesting, because this is going to go back to Robert when we go back to the Trident, and we go back to what happened there. In this point, Robert probably knew that Joffrey was lying. But even then, he didn't have the guts to stand up to what was really going on. He let the lie impact his relationship with Ned and his child, or Ned's child. So again, I think it shows a lot of cowardice from Robert in a lot of ways, that he was not willing to stick up for the truth. I think that's a very interesting point, and it kind of shows that maybe Robert has been so tired of the Lannisters and all of the things they've done, that maybe at that point he was caught in a moment of weakness. And what I think is the most telling line of this chapter is that Robert confides in Ned, telling him that more than once he has dreamt of leaving it all behind and going to Essos, and warring and whoring. That was what he was made for. And they would call him the Sellsword King, how the singers would love him. But the one thing that kept him from doing it was thinking about Joffrey on the throne, with Cersei whispering in his ear. Robert then specifically asks, how could he have made a son like that? And again, massive foreshadowing here, because it's supposed to point out, Robert and Joffrey aren't alike, at all. There's nothing similar about the two, right? Outside of maybe them both being tall. Joffrey is tall, but he's not as tall as Robert was. But Joffrey is this character that's not really that muscular. He doesn't look anything like Robert. It's really supposed to put in this idea that even Robert questions, how could this be my son? He thinks it is his son, but he's questioning, just doesn't come out like me at all. It's like if my parents, who both have very dark hair, and they both have like lighter skin tone. So it'd be like if I came out with like very blonde hair and I was like darker skinned, it'd be like, how is this my son? This just doesn't add up. Like, it's one of those kind of situations here where Ned's like, maybe I should, think about that line a little bit more, which he will later on. Ned responds awkwardly to this, and he's kind of thinking like, what do you want me to say here? Like, I don't particularly like Joffrey, but, but he tells Robert that he's still young. Remember how wild you were at his age. Now, Robert notes that he wishes Joffrey was more wild like that, because the wild that Robert was, you could say, was just kind of maybe just a young man, right? Just having a lot of urges, coming into manhood, making a lot of bad decisions. Joffrey's not like that. Joffrey is cruel. He's kind of a coward, a wimp. He's everything that Robert wasn't. And I want to note something, that while this whole conversation is going on, Ned notes how this seems very painful to Robert to even talking about. And he jokingly goes as far as saying, John had always worried about me, but look how I turned into a great king. And he seems like he's definitely like joking here. And Ned kind of starts to begin, but Robert stops him, saying, you were never a good liar. Now say I'm a better king than Aerys and be done with it, slapping him on the back. And that's something I will agree with. I think Robert, regardless of his flaws, is definitely a better king than Aerys. I'd put him above a couple kings. I don't think he'd be like that high up on the list. But yeah, I definitely don't think he was the worst king of them all. Robert then notes with him here, all of these things will be better, that him and Ned will put everything to rights and all of that. Robert then notes the smell of bacon. This is the second time we've now smelled bacon or sausage in this chapter. Moving on into page 311. And another thing I want to point out here is, while we're on the subject of sons, right, we can tell that Robert is obviously displeased with Joffrey. He's disappointed in him. He doesn't really like him as a son. Like, he tries to love him, but he just definitely would rather Joffrey be something that he's not. And Robert asks Ned what he thinks, or who he thinks will win the tournament. And if he has seen this Knight of Flowers, Loras Tyrell, and that any father would be proud of a son like that. And last tourney, he knocked Jaime into the dirt, and Robert could not stop laughing. Interestingly, we see that Robert also says that Renly has told him that he has a sister as lovely as Dawn. Again, we see that the seeds are being sprung here from the Tyrell-Renly plot. We got back in, I think it was like 2 or 3 chapters ago, that Renly had asked Ned about Marjorie and if she looked like Lyanna, because again, the plan as of right now is to eventually get rid of Cersei so that Marjorie will become the queen. And Renly, I don't think, is an idiot. I think Renly knows that Cersei has been giving birth to bastards. And because the question would be, well, how else would they get rid of Cersei? Cersei, to stop being king or queen, there would have to be either some sort of annulment by the Sept or by the Faith, or she would have to die. So again, I think for me, I think Renly did know of the bastardry. I just think Renly is too clever and knows he has too many friends at court and not have figured this out already. But at this moment, they go to breakfast and are eating. And while they're eating, Robert recounts this time at the Vale where they had some oranges and Robert had begun throwing them. And there had been this great like food fight with oranges. And that when Jon Arryn had come into the Great Hall, there had been a mess. And again, this kind of like just puts into Ned, like just remembering his younger years and the person that Robert was. And this is the person that he used to know. At this point, he kind of thinks that, yes, if I, Ned, can find the evidence that the Lannisters tried to kill Bran and that they're doing all of these things, then Robert will act on it and we will be rid of the Lannisters. And if Tywin rose up in defiance, he would smash him like he did Rhaegar. And this is kind of like playing out like a fantasy in Ned's mind a little bit. It's kind of like this, for the readers as well, it's like, this is just the dream. This is what we want to happen. And we know it's not going to happen. But something I think that's interesting is that Ned like thinks that Robert will smash Tywin if he ever rose up. And I agree with that sentiment. I just don't think, who would the Lannisters have as allies? in this war. I think everyone will be against them. So I think Ned is right in that assumption that if Robert was still alive and all this was revealed to him, Tywin and the Lannisters would have to either bend the knee and just forget what happened here, or they would die. But Ned noted how this breakfast had tasted better than most, and it was time for the tourney to resume. Now, again, I think Ned is just this idea that a lot of weight has kind of come off of his shoulders. You know, reconnecting with Robert after that ugliness on the Trident, coming back together, and Ned kind of is, I think at this point, reassured that if he does find everything, he can go to Robert. That's been a big concern so far. And the other idea is that this tourney is nearly over. It's coming to a close, and that's something that Ned just wants to be done with. Before he goes to sit with Sansa and Mordain, he goes to help Robert to his seat. And again, we notice that Cersei is absent, giving Ned, again, more hope of the kind of splitting of Cersei and Robert. But we notice that Ned, and he notes this, is that he promised to see the final tilts with Sansa and Mordain. And I think this is very interesting, is that if we go back to the last chapter, Mordain was this character that was so passed out drunk, she couldn't, like, her head was down on the table when Sansa leaves with the Hound. To find that the next day, Mordain is sick. Septa Mordain, a great, teacher and person in charge of Sansa. That's all I'm going to say. And at this moment, the horns went off to announce the start of the tilts. That gets us into page 312. So getting into page 312, we see the Hound was the first up, and as Ned approached, Sansa barely noticed him. This Hound is dressed fairly plainly, with little ornament outside of his hound helm. Again, we just see that the Hound really doesn't care about having this elaborate armor or ornaments or things that make him stand out. All he has on is his hound helm. And again, something else I want to note is how Sansa is just so fixated on this match. Because again, the last interaction that Sansa had with the Hound was him threatening to kill her. So again, I think Sansa is just really wanting someone to kill him, probably at this point. And going up against Jaime, well, there's a probably good chance of it. But at this moment, Littlefinger puts 100 gold dragons on Jaime, who arrives looking as rich as ever, like the previous day. Renly accepts this deal and says the Hound has a hungry look to him, which Littlefinger notes that he won't bite the hand that feeds him, being that the Cleganes are bannermen to the Lannisters. Again, a great point there, that would tourney knights go against their liege lord? And I think that's a great little point, and especially when we're playing this idea that the Lannisters are very corrupt and are willing to do things like that. It's a very interesting twist when we see that the Hound is actually going to beat Jaime. It's going to be something that maybe sets Sandor apart, and something when we see that, the Hound leaves later on in Clash, this is one of those moments that shows that the Hound is not just straight up for the Lannisters. He is someone that cares about himself more. Ned then notes that Sansa seems extremely interested in this match, and that Ned, thinking, he hopes they both lose, or hopes that they both will lose. With that being said, on the first bout, Jaime gets the edge. He shifts his seat at the last second, and he strikes a blow on the Hound, but not enough to unhorse him. On the second bout, the Hound is ready, and he shifts seats at the same time as Jaime, hitting Jaime and knocking him to the ground. We even see that Jaime's helm is dented. At this moment, Sansa notes she knew he would win. Again, showing into how ferocious we see that the Hound is, and how that's kind of been installed into Sansa. Now, getting into page 313, Littlefinger overhears Sansa and tells her to tell him who is going to win the next match before Renly wins more. But we get a great line here. Remember, we have this idea that Tyrion won this dagger away from Littlefinger because Tyrion betted against Jaime Lannister. And we're going to get a line here where Renly says that it is a pity Tyrion is not here, or he would have won double, again implying Tyrion always backs Jaime. Again, a complete contradictory statement from what we heard Littlefinger saying. Littlefinger said that Tyrion had won this dagger, again going for Loras instead of Jaime. Very interesting and contradictory information. Now we see Jaime struggling to get his helmet off because, again, it was dented. It's kind of stuck on his head. And Robert is heard laughing over everyone as Jaime blindly walks off. We now see, again, the next tilt as the mountain is preparing for his tilt with Loras, and Ned describes the mountain as being much taller than even Robert or Hodor, and easily the biggest man he has ever seen. And unlike his brother, Gregor did not stay at court, and was with Tywin when King's Landing was sacked. Again, kind of shows the difference where the mountain seems like he's purely a Lannister guy through and through, and Tywin's, again, kind of mad dog, where the Hound isn't really that. The Hound is someone that, yes, he is with the Lannisters, but he kind of has varying loyalties. And we know that Gregor had been made a knight at 17 with a reputation of being ferocious. And rumors even said that he dashed the Prince Aegon's head against the wall and raped Elia before putting her to the sword as well. Ned notes again that the Mountain does not have a good reputation, right? Even though Ned has never really spoken to Gregor, even though he definitely was at the Greyjoy Rebellion, his reputation is not good. And again, the other thing to point out here is that Ned notes that Gregor was just a knight among thousands. Yes, he was bigger, but think about it from this point of view. Like, there's so many thousands of dudes. Ned's not going to be able to talk to all of them. So it makes sense as to why Ned would never have interacted with Gregor. It also kind of shows like the scale at which the Greyjoy Rebellion was as well. But as we see this, Gregor is marrying a third wife. But the rumors on the deaths of his previous were not great. They were a little mysterious, and seems like there was some foul play involved. And that gets us into page 314. Alongside of this, we also see that Clegane Keep is a very grim place, where servants are known to go missing regularly, and deaths happened very queerly. Sister died of queer circumstances, the incident with the Hound, and his father mysteriously dying while hunting, all while Gregor inherited all of it. Again, very suspicious. It kind of gives off like the Clubfoot vibes, where his family members have mysterious deaths, and then he gets all this, inherits everything. It kind of gives off like the same vibe. Also, another thing is we would see that both of those two families would occupy Harrenhal for a time. So again, a lot of similarities in my opinion. But at this point, the Hound had left, pledging his sword to the Lannisters and never returning. Again, understandable. Your brother Gregor is now in charge. We see how he's a brute, what he did to, his own brother. It makes complete sense. As well, we see the Knight of Flowers arrive, once again dressed very flamboyant-like. Again, kind of similar to the way we see in the background image that I have up. And Sansa even notes how beautiful he looks, and the common people absolutely adore him. We then see the differences in mounts, as Loras is made for speed, while the Mountain's is bigger and more for strength and power. And Sansa tells Ned to not let him hurt Loras, and Ned notes these are turning lances made to explode on impact. But even then, Ned thinks, just yesterday, a boy died. But Ned also notes that Sansa still has the rose that Loras gave to her. Again, Sansa is a sucker for these big knights, and again, it plays into that. And again, you can't really fault Sansa here. Sansa is someone that, a really attractive guy has given her a flower. He's succeeding in the contest. It's something that would be really special to her, and so she keeps it. But at this moment, we see something very weird start to happen. Gregor's mount is not obeying him all of a sudden. The horse is swaying his head violently, and the Mountain tries to kick his horse into action, but that makes the horse nearly throw him off. Loras goes to the end of the line after he had already bowed to Robert, and he is in his ready position. And the Mountain, struggling to force the horse back into line, is finally ready. So we see the Mountain and Loras start their tilt. Gregor is struggling to manage his horse and getting his shield and lance in position. And when they meet, Gregor goes flying from his horse. As the masses go crazy for Loras, the Hound is heard laughing, and this is all done without Loras' lance even breaking. So what this is really supposed to say here is that, one, Loras wins this tilt with ease. It's not even close, which is very suspicious given how the Mountain has had really no problems with anybody else in this tournament so far that we've known or that we've heard of. So when we see this happen and Loras's, turning lance, which is again made to break on impact, doesn't break, it implies that Gregor was kind of already falling out of the saddle, and Loras maybe had just briefly touched him a little bit, and he fell. Because again, Gregor's trying to manage, one, his lance, getting it into a good position, and as well as his sword, while all the time his horse isn't responding to his commands correctly. And I want to point this out that, Gregor is someone that's a hothead, and he is someone that, is quick to anger and violence. But I mean, think about this, right? You're someone that's been going at these tilts all day yesterday. You make it to the top 4, and in reality, he probably got cheated. Loras probably did some sketchy stuff here that costed him extra gold and winning. So, I think that's something to keep in mind as Gregor does the actions that he does. So Gregor then, again, is trying to untangle himself from his horse, and as he rises, he throws his helm down or calls for his sword from his squire. At this point, we also see that his horse is struggling to get up and it is finally back onto its feet. But as soon as it gets back onto its feet, Gregor has his sword. And Gregor does one fell slash that brings the horse back to its knees, nearly cutting its head in half. The crowd went from cheering for Loras to panic as the mountain starts towards Loras. Ned shouts to stop him, but no one is quick enough. Loras is calling for his sword, but the mountain simply pushes him away and grabs the reins of Loras' horse. Gregor then proceeds to deal a savage blow to Loras' breastplate, making him fall to the ground. Gregor is about to give the finishing blow when the hound tells him to let the boy be and jerks him away from Loras. So I want to point something out here. One, I think a common theme of this chapter is really to foreshadow kind of what is going on with Robert, how he's kind of this ineffectual king. Again, in the first part, we saw how Robert was going to participate in the melee. Ned kind of manipulates and talks him down from that. But we see even here, right? How is this happening? How is it that there has been enough time for the mountain with his sword, who has just killed a horse, to go all the way to Loras, even when Ned is telling people to stop him? It really puts the idea here that are people loyal to, the people in charge, Ned and Robert, or others? Because there's a very slow reaction. We're going to see the Hound and Gregor get into an entire fight before we even see any swordmen, ready and there on the scene. So I think that's very interesting to think about here, is that the slow reaction time of, whether that's the City Watch or even the Kingsguard, as we'll see. And Varys is going to kind of connect this back into a point later on where the Kingsguard's loyalty is very sketchy at this point anyway. Something else I want to notice is that Loras doesn't appear to have any massive injuries here, which is very good for Loras. Loras does get hit by the mountain and kind of gets out of this unscathed. So again, Loras probably got lucky here. The mountain then, feeling the Hound behind him, swings his sword in a massive arc that the Hound repels. And that'll get us into page 316. And moving on, it seems like the fight goes on for a while. But Ned notices the mountain tries to kill the Hound multiple times, going for his head. But not once does the Hound go for the mountain's unprotected head. So it kind of shows a lot here about the Hound. The Hound is not trying to kill his brother. Regardless of what the Hound thinks of his brother in this moment, he's not willing to kill him. He's not willing to go for that savage blow, whether that's because of the loyalty he feels to his brother, who is, technically his liege lord, as well as his loyalty to the Lannisters, because Gregor is a bannerman of the Lannisters. It maybe wouldn't be right for him to do so. Also, kinslaying is not good. So the Hound at this point is not really trying to kill the mountain, more like he's trying to disarm him. Now, the only thing that interrupts this fighting is that Robert finally taking action and telling them to stop this madness in the name of your king. And again, Ned kind of notes here that Jon Arryn had always told them that to be a great leader, to be a good, captain or person in charge on a battlefield, you need to have a good battlefield voice. And this is something that Robert definitely had. But if we think about why this is important, think about if you're in a battle, you need to be able to speak loud enough that people can hear you over, swords going off, people dying, screaming. You need to be able to have that presence so people can understand what, they're supposed to be doing. Are we retreating? Are we pushing? Are we, doing this or that? Robert has that voice, and it really is used here as it carries, and instantly we see the hound drop to one knee, and the mountain drops his sword. Again, it's kind of like how it is in the show, or kind of how I have in the background here, where he kind of just throws his sword in front of him, all the while, again, like the image I have back, where Loras is just kind of on the ground watching. And the mountain just leaves. He pushes Barristan out of the way, and Robert lets him go, which I think is very interesting. Robert letting the mountain go after he tries to kill a man in Loras who was unarmed at that time, and then also trying to kill his brother the Hound. It is interesting to show like how Robert has such a leniency and mercy for some of these people. Maybe he fears that, you know, if he imprisons Gregor or something like that, maybe Tywin would be pissed, or the Lancers would be pissed, or maybe he's afraid that people would die in the capturing of the mountain. I don't know. I think it's very interesting. It continuously shows how Robert has his leniency for the Lannisters and or their bannermen. Another thing I think is interesting is that anyone shoving Barristan out of the way is just weird to think about because of how much Barristan has a great reputation. To think anybody is pushing Barristan the Bold out of the way is quite weird to think about. Now, all this time, Sansa had been crying again because Loras had been attacked. She didn't want him to die. And when the Hound had basically beaten the mountain, Sansa asks, does this mean that the Hound has won? And her father says, no, there's gonna, there has to be a final tilt between Loras and the Hound to decide it. But at this point, there actually is no reason for this because Loras says the day is the Hound's and that he should be the champion, which again, the Hound is not going to just not accept. It's a lot of gold that he's going to be getting. Or maybe on the outside, he doesn't care about, being praised by these people or applauded or all of that. And he just wants the gold. But I think subconsciously, it is nice for the Hound to get some recognition as being like a hero or a good guy. But I think if you look at Loras, think about Loras and the way the Tyrells play the game a lot. And this is kind of how this is shown, right? The Tyrells do maybe some tricks or some dirty manipulation, but they stay out of the fighting, right? They let others do that for them. So the Hound basically fights the mountain for Loras. And what does Loras do? He uses that for his benefit, right? He does this really heroic thing showing that, oh yeah, I'm willing to not be the person that wins the tournament, and the Hound can be because he saved my life. When in reality, Loras probably did a lot of things that were not heroic. He probably rigged this match against the mountain as best that he could. So again, it's saving face. It makes Loras more loved. It's a lot of what the Tyrells do in their mindset and how they play the Game of Thrones. And I want to note something else that I think is very interesting, is we see that the Hound, for the first time, is loved by the Commons for maybe a small amount of time, but still, he is loved by them. And we see that when he stands up to the Lannister regime, again, the mountain is part of that, he is rewarded. I think that's something interesting to think about later on when the Hound eventually leaves, is that, the Lannisters have never really given the Hound much. Like, the Hound hasn't really earned much off of them. So I thought that was an interesting point to learn here as well. But as Ned and Sansa are leaving, they are joined by Barristan, Littlefinger, and others like Renly, and they discuss Loras's win, how maybe foul play had been involved. Everyone knows that the mountain likes are huge, ill-tempered beasts. Loras could have, again, planned something on one of these horses or done something to manipulate this tilt. Barristan then says, again, there's no honor in tricks, and Renly counters, yes, but a lot of gold. And again, the other part of this, again, is that the Commons are not going to know. They are not going to know any different. People will still love Loras even if he did some dirty tricks to win. And that's the point. Loras loses nothing outside of maybe his self-conscious, maybe. But again, you're tricking the mountain. Loras is not really going to feel bad for the mountain. Unfortunately, I guess. But again, I think this all makes sense. Now, as well, we hear that a man named Anguy, I don't know how to say his name, but yeah, a commoner from the Dornish marshes wins the archery contest over Balon Swan and Jalabur Exo. Not great. Again, I'm not great on pronunciation of names, but the Summer Islander, put it that way. And that'll lead us into page 317. And Ned tries to send out Alan to try and offer the man a position in his guard. But again, we see a very common theme with people that have freshly been knighted or won a tournament. Anguy, or however you want to say his name, is too drunk off his winnings. He refuses. Again, showing how Ned is looking for men, so he's not stupid. He's trying to get more power, more loyal men to him. But again, I think this is something that we see a lot with people, is that this is a great position, right? Being a part of Ned's guard gives you a lot of station. Like, it gets you a good life. It stops you from kind of being a commoner. So that's something that I think there's so many people in this world, and even, you know, and not even just Song of Ice and Fire, I mean the real world, that think about the short term. They don't think about the long term, or things that could help you in the future. I think that's a really good point here that's made. In the melee, a near 40 men participated, but Thoris of Myr, a red priest with a shaved head, who fought with a flaming sword, won. Which I think is very interesting. This is this grand tournament. There's a lot of people here, right? All over the Riverlands, all over the country have come here. There's only 40 people that fight in the melee. I thought that was a little weird. I guess people just... I think the melee is kind of represented in this story as not the thing the commoners or most people enjoy watching. It's not as clean. It's not, you know, the jousting stuff. But Ned was high in spirits at the feast afterwards. Robert was in a good mood. His daughters were behaving, even more pleasant. Sansa saying, you know, Arya, I wish you had come. It was great. And asking about her lessons with Syrio, and Arya being nice to Sansa. You know, there's a lot of great, you know, a lot of good between the two. But here's the thing that I think is interesting. Are the two being nice to each other because Ned is around? Because we see whenever Ned is not around, the two don't act great towards each other. And I think that's an interesting point. But Ned does, you know, specifically note that they are acting good to each other, which kind of would imply that they don't always do that. But Arya does note that she has some fresh bruises from her dancing lessons. But again, Ned is still in high spirits. The Lannisters are also nowhere to be seen, but also we get an interesting note that the singers are doing a great song about the Dance of the Dragons. I believe this is our first actual name drop of this period, so I thought that was a little cool that I wanted to shout out in this video. Ned then looks at the bruises himself on Arya and asks if he is too hard on her, and Arya says every hurt is a lesson, and every lesson makes you better, which again has a lot of wisdom in it. If you think about it, if maybe you take away the idea of hurts or physical hurts, every time you fail, it's a lesson to not repeat that failure. That's something that I think is very wise from Syrio to be imparting on Arya. If you make a mistake, don't make that mistake twice. It's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes, but just don't do it in the same way again, because then you didn't get anything out of it. You didn't learn from it. And that's kind of the point here. I think that's some really great wisdom. And it may be some unorthodox training that Arya is getting, but she's learning a lot. She's getting a lot wiser because of it. Ned then notes how Syrio had a good reputation and seemed to fit well for Arya. Again, like her training style, because Arya uses a shorter sword, and again, she's not very strong, so the styles match up pretty well. But there were things that were just odd, like Arya had black silk tied around her eyes, and apparently she was learning to see with her nose, her ears, and her skin. Again, great foreshadowing to kind of the stuff that's going to happen with the Faceless Men later on. But again, it's trying to heighten Arya's senses outside of just using her eyes. That's something we see that's happening with Arya kind of in the last book that we've gotten. And I think all of this makes sense to me. Now, what Ned is kind of thinking about is Arya doesn't need all of this, right? Arya just needs someone that's going to teach her the basics without doing all these antics, all this stuff that isn't really needed. Is kind of how Ned's thinking about it. And Ned is someone that is kind of trying to understand why this is happening. And Arya says tomorrow they will be chasing cats. And Ned kind of asks, again, if she wants to keep doing this. Is that what she wants? And that is what Arya wants. Now, Ned is kind of smarter than, you know, he kind of appears. He knows there's no point arguing with Arya. If Arya wants to continue this, she's going to continue this. But Ned still thinks, like, he could get her Jory. Right? Or he can maybe even ask Barristan to train her, which is incredible. I mean, think about Bran. That would be Bran's dream. You know, before he became crippled, If Bran would have been able to train with Barristan, that would have been a dream come true. And here's Arya, who's just denying that. She doesn't even want that. And again, Ned thinks that any master of arms could be teaching her properly without all this weird stuff, chasing cats, doing all this other stuff. But again, Ned notes there's no real point of trying to argue with her. Ned then takes the girls back to their chambers, and specifically Sansa with her dreams and Arya with her bruises. Again, separating the two into what they kind of are at right now. Arya is kind of hard at work trying to be this assassin type character, and we see Sansa, who is still dreaming about things, and she still is living in her fantasies. Ned notes that it's been a hot day and goes to open the shutters and notices that Littlefinger's chambers are still lit. Because again, it's very dark right now. I think we're close to midnight at this point. It's not really a big significant point in this chapter, but I would like to think that this is a little hint that Littlefinger is always working towards his goals, thinking about how he can manipulate events, and again, being up in the middle of the night, a little suspicious, I guess. Ned then begins to question the dagger and how Tyrion had even lost it in the wager. And I think this is interesting because if we go back to part 1 of Ned 7, there's a specific line that Renly talks about how he wishes Tyrion had been at this tournament. He says it out loud, right? Ned could hear it. Where if Tyrion was here, he would have doubled the earnings because Tyrion always backs Jaime, or implying that at least. But we see that Ned wasn't paying attention. Because, again, it should not make any sense for Tyrion to have lost this dagger waging against Jaime Lannister, that he bet on Loras over Jaime. That makes no sense. It's something that Ned doesn't pick up on, and it's something that is crucial to Littlefinger's lies that he has been telling. Again, connecting Littlefinger, Ned looking down Littlefinger's chambers, and this lie that he's kind of thinking about during this point. Ned continues on saying, he's confused on why anyone would want to hurt Bran, but he knows all of these events are connected. He is just not sure how, which again, Ned is correct. All of these events are connected to a degree. But Ned thinks that Lysa says nothing. Stannis did not return for the tourney, and all Ned has is Robert's bastard. Again, Lysa saying nothing to me should be evidence to Ned that there's something going on. I just, you can go with the idea that Lysa is kind of gone mad. She's unstable. Maybe that's why she's in grief. But again, it should be a warning sign that Lysa is not here and not saying anything. Now, also, Stannis not returning for the tourney, I think is a little interesting note. I think Ned subconsciously knew Stannis wasn't going to do that. But on the other side of that, I think when you look at the idea here that Stannis does not return means there's a lot of danger here in King's Landing. That should be kind of going off in Ned's head. But that gets us into page 319. So getting into page 319, Ned knows that the boy is Robert's because Renly is too young to have had a child this, again, old, when, again, Renly is not that old himself. Stannis is too cold and proud to have done this. But Ned thinks that this matters, though. Like, why would Jon Arryn have specifically targeted out this boy? Why was he visiting him? What was the importance of the bastard? Robert had known bastards. Again, so why is there a focus on Gendry, right? When we know Robert has bastards, Edric Storm, who is at Storm's End, who is being there at Renly's basically behest, I guess. And that Renly has kind of been looking after him, even though Renly's not there. He has, his own people looking after him. But Ned also notes Robert's first child, Maya Stone in the Vale, who Robert had had when he was not even a man yet. This would imply that Robert was probably between the ages of 14 to 16 when he had Maya. Again, it kind of shows why Lyanna didn't want to be with Robert. He was someone that was sleeping around, and at such a young age, it showed who Robert would become later on in life. Now, Ned is starting to get to the point. He questions this. Why would this matter, right? None of them would come before Robert's baseborn children, and that's where Ned's thought is interrupted. So Ned almost gets to why this is important, but he is interrupted. This moment, he is interrupted by Harwin, who tells him a man has come to speak with him, but he will not give him his name. Ned lets him in and asks to speak with him alone. And Ned does not know who this person is until Varys reveals himself. Varys asks to share a drink with him, to which Ned obliges, but says, I could have passed within a foot of you and not noticed you. Because again, Varys is very different in appearance. This is something we're going to talk about in 320, but when we look at Varys' appearance, he is someone that at all the small council meetings, his public appearances, has dressed very richly. He has been perfumed. He's very much looked kind of the richy rich role. When he comes to Ned's chambers, he is someone that looks very common. He smells of sweat. He doesn't at all appear to be anything more than just a commoner. Varys notes that it is good because he does not want to be seen by Cersei, who has taken a very big interest in him. Ned asks how he got past his guards, to which Varys says there are many passages only known to ghosts or spiders. Again, implying that Varys knows a lot of information, and he knows how to get through this castle, that there's some secret passages as well. Again, I want you guys to remember that when we come back to how Varys is going to try and manipulate Ned. But again, that's very powerful information to know. Varys then continues saying, "You are the king's hand, and the king is a fool. Your friend, yes, and all that, but he is still a fool." Varys says that the queen wanted to kill him today with the melee. And this is a point that I kind of made in the first part. Would Cersei attempt to try and kill him during this melee? I thought, one of the reasons why, if you're Ned, you don't want Robert to fight here is because of an off chance of an accident happening where Robert was to be injured, killed, and die. So the question here would be, did Cersei actually plan this? We don't know. There's no real confirmation. We're kind of left here with Varys' argument. Ned counters saying that she did not want him to fight, which Varys counters saying she forbade him in front of the entire court. What do you think Robert was going to do? Robert is someone that's very strong-willed. When people tell him he can't do something, he will do it to prove them wrong because of his ego, his pride. In that sense, he's a lot like a character like, say, Walter White in Breaking Bad. Now, again, I could go either way with this point because Varys is making a logical point. That is something you would want to do if you wanted to push Robert to go into this melee. But at the same time, could it just have been Cersei didn't want Robert to make a fool of himself and just make her look stupid? I don't know, right? I'm not sure what Cersei was planning here, and I would love to know if we ever get a Cersei POV to see if she was actually trying to get Robert killed. She never thinks about it for this point during the melee, but I would be interested in what you guys think. Do you guys think Cersei would have tried to kill Robert during this melee? Ned even thinks this through, saying that yes, denying Robert something was the quickest way to make sure he did it, but Ned thinks, who would dare hit Robert? And Varys again brings up a very good point. Lannisters have many friends, and who could have blamed someone if a fell sword hit Robert, or a horse fell on him, or any type of accident could have happened? The person responsible would weep to clear himself of punishment. Again, these are great points, and Varys has a reasonable argument, right? We talk about a lot of manipulations in this world where, you can't really see that side when you're looking at it from hindsight. This is one of those arguments where you're like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And Varys continues saying that Cersei would, being this widow that's deeply saddened, would pardon the man responsible, or if she wanted the safer option, would let Ilyn Payne take his head, which would be much safer. Again, also a wink to later what's going to happen with Ned, right? Ned is going to have this poor thing where he is going to try and work with Cersei, and that ends up getting him killed. It's not because of Cersei, but he still loses his head. So a little bit of that foreshadow there. Ned then says you knew this plot and did nothing. But again, Varys brings up another great point. Varys is someone that is speaking with honesty while also manipulating Ned. Because Varys, in my opinion, is trying to gain Ned's trust, very similar to the way Littlefinger does as well. And Varys says that he is a master of whisperers, not soldiers, which again makes sense given what Ned would know about Varys. But could Varys not get soldiers? That is a little debatable. Ned then suggests you could have come to me, and Varys once again counters saying you would have gone straight to the king, and the king would have fought regardless. Also, Varys says that he did not trust Ned and wanted to see who he was. Now, this point is just off. Varys knows who Ned is, right? There's no doubt in my mind that Varys doesn't understand who Ned is a person. Ned is someone that has a very distinct personality. He's someone that has a reputation. That point is Varys trying to, again, save his skin and manipulate Ned a bit. But again, Varys has a great point that if he would have gone to Ned, Ned would have done that. But Ned is then taken aback by this, which I think is understandable because Ned is someone that very rarely gets this feeling that people do not trust him. He is someone that has a reputation of being trusting, of being an honorable guy. So again, that should kind of show that Varys is playing Ned in this moment. Varys then notes there are two people in the city, those for the realm and those for themselves. Until this morning, he did not know which Ned was, and now he knows why Cersei fears Ned so much. Which again, it just makes it this idea that, like, Varys doesn't understand who Ned was already, which he obviously does. This is just a little bit of a play or charade for Ned. And another thing I want to point out here is that, you know, Cersei, again, fears Ned for that reason, but Cersei also fears people that are just, they're honorable. They're willing to be, to a degree, upholding the law to where it might even seem cruel. Again, that's why she doesn't like Stannis. She fears Stannis more than Renly for that exact reason. Ned says that she ought to fear Varys, to which Varys again plays the powerless, saying if Cersei commanded his head off, Robert would do it. Nobody sings tales of spiders. Which again, I agree to some degree here, but Varys is playing like he has no power, like he can't escape them, like he can't conjure up some swords or information that could possibly destroy some things, that he couldn't find any evidence for Cersei's children being bastards. It comes off as Varys is trying to go, yeah, I can be useful to you, Ned, but I'm not dangerous at all. Again, it's Varys playing the game that he needs to show that he's valuable while also not being a threat. Varys says, here lies our salvation, because Robert will not kill Ned on Cersei's command, which leaves Ned to ponder this idea. Again, the idea here is that Ned is kind of the only person that can talk to Robert and actually get some sense into him. That Robert, again, your children are bastards by Jaime and Cersei. So that is kind of the whole idea and what Varys is kind of playing at or in this moment. But that'll get us into page 322. Ned, again, in this moment, we see a common theme with Ned where he would rather just be back up in Winterfell and back up in the north. And again, something we talked about when we looked at the chapter where Ned is deciding whether to be the Hand. He is someone that fought against going south. Catelyn and Lewin were the two people that made him go south. But he's thinking about, you know, in the north, the only two enemies we have there is winter and the wildlings, which I think is a little bit of an understatement. The Boltons have also done a couple, you know, rebellions and stuff. But, you know, I'll give Ned credit where credit is due, I guess. Ned starts to remark that surely Robert has friends and his brothers, to which Varys says true. His brothers hate the Lannisters, but that does not mean that they love the king either. Which I guess is true. They don't love Robert, but they would still probably be loyal to Robert. Stannis is someone that is deathly loyal to Robert, even though Robert has slighted Stannis on many occasions, again, from Stannis' point of view anyway. Stannis is still loyal to his brother. So that is kind of something where I'm like, yeah, I don't back that logic, Varys. It's one of those things where it's like Varys is trying to isolate Ned and put all of the pressure on Ned. Renly is someone as well that I think would back Robert. I think he's loyal to Robert as well. Varys notes that the Kingsguard is not what it once was. The days of Aemon the Dragon Knight are over. Again, I think it's interesting that he goes to Aemon the Dragon Knight, because I think you wouldn't even point to that to when the, you know, Kingsguard fell off. I think the Kingsguard really fell off after, like, Aerys's reign or during Robert's rebellion. And Varys notes that half of the Kingsguard are in Cersei's pocket, and the others, besides Barristan, Varys has suspicions about. And even the small council, Pycelle values his position, not the king, and loyalty. Littlefinger, well, values himself, and Barristan values honor. And Ned thinks that this is true. Ned thinks that if this is true, they need to go straight to Robert. To which Varys says, and do what? It would be my word against Cersei's. It would be the trident all over again. We need proof. And I agree to disagree. if Varys came out, being the spy master with Ned backing his information, I think Robert may listen to them, but I don't think it would be as concrete, right? It wouldn't be as, let's overthrow the Lannisters right here and now. I do agree with that point from Varys. I think Robert maybe wouldn't go the full route, but I do think he would tend to actually believe them a bit. Varys then tells Ned he might as well get Ilyn to chop off his head. Now again, more foreshadowing to Ned's inevitable death, because he is someone that's going to go through with this information, and he's just going to have kind of a piece of paper being kind of his proof of what or whatnot, and that's going to end up getting him killed. Ned says that, well, they're going to try to kill him again. What can we do? And Varys says, of course they will, but hopefully we can forestall them. Again, this is the difference in Varys and Littlefinger's plan. Varys is trying to forestall any type of civil war or war until young Griff is ready to come over. So at this point, again, Varys tells Ned, thank you for the wine, putting his disguise back on and telling Ned next time he sees him at the small council or in public to act with the same normal contempt for him. Again, Ned is someone that has not liked Varys up to this point. So again, if Ned all of a sudden started looking differently at Varys and treating him differently, people would read into that and look at him a little differently. Like there might be something going on between the two. But before Varys can leave, Ned then asks, how did Jon Arryn die? And Varys, for a while, had been wondering when Ned would get to this. But he tells them it was the tears of Lys, a colorless and odorless, undetectable poison. Varys says he had urged Jon to use a taster, but Jon said, what kind of a man does that? And again, we're not even sure if this actually occurred. This could again be Varys just making up stuff to try and gain some trust with Ned. But I think this possibly could have happened as well, because in my opinion, it doesn't really make sense for Varys to want Jon Arryn to keep living, because Jon Arryn probably was getting very close, if not about to reveal the information of Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella's parentage to Robert. That would have sparked a war between the Lannisters and the Crown, which would have been a war way too early for Varys. Ned then asks, who poisoned Jon? And Varys hints at the idea of Hugh. Who else gained from Jon Arryn's death? Something, again, I pointed out earlier where it kind of points to this idea like Hugh is someone that stays in the capital when everyone else from the Vale leaves. It shows that he was maybe not the most loyal to the Vale or House Arryn as a whole. And he was someone that gained much when Jon died. He gained a knighthood, he gained a new set of armor, all of these things. And again, Varys notes that it was most unfortunate that he died right before Ned could talk to him in his shiny new armor. Again, very suspicious, playing on what Ned already thinks is suspicious. Ned asks one final question. Why would they want to kill him? And Varys responds, he was asking too many questions, and leaves the room. Again, for Ned, this is something that Ned should be thinking about as well. Ned is someone that's also asking a lot of questions, doing the same thing Jon Arryn would do. Again, more foreshadowing to the idea that Ned's end is going to be somewhat similar to Jon's, resulting in his death. And that is going to be the end of Ned 7. Again, a very long chapter. Again, the first part was about 40 minutes. This one's going to be probably close to 35 minutes. So again, very long chapter, about an hour 15 for Ned 7. So I hope you guys all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys all into next week's reread. Bye, guys.